welcome to the final feedback loop webinar for the Griffith local co-design process for your alternatives to ED service. I'm Carrie, I do some facilitation with Roses.
Hi, I'm Tina and I've been involved in developing some services for Roses for SPP workers.
Thanks, Tina. If you could just bring up the slides, we'll begin taking people through the co-design outputs.
Yeah, so just give me one sec. There you go.
Thanks, Tina. So we'll just begin with some acknowledgements. We first like to acknowledge the traditional occupants and custodians of all the lands we're meeting on today. And in a virtual world, that's a number of them, but particularly the Wurundjeri people, we'd like to acknowledge this is the country on which this safe space is going to be established, and to pay our respects to their elders past and also present and emerging leaders. Also really just to acknowledge the enormous contributions that Aboriginal people and Indigenous communities make to suicide prevention efforts all throughout this country. Thanks, Tina. In the context of co-designing alternative services for people in suicidal crisis, we also like to acknowledge people with a lived experience, particularly to acknowledge just the uniquely valuable expertise that experts by experience bring to co-design processes for services like this, and also to acknowledge that health professionals that have participated in this co-design process and necessarily also have their own lived experience professionally and sometimes personally, and that we deeply appreciate that perspective being brought as well to the process. Thanks. So just a quick recap of the process so far in your region. We had the lived experience focused conversations, so those small groups where we got to hear what the current experience of either accessing ED or not doing that for if you're in suicidal crisis or supporting someone, a loved one through that process. We also then had a session, what we've said here as 1A and 1B, but we brought that together, and it was bringing all the lived experience participants together to really start to look at how is the local space going to meet a lot of the unmet needs that they'd identify, also to start to draft the values and principles that are going to guide the local safe space, and really start to hear what their sort of best and brightest ideas are for designing this model of what that's going to look like. We then also spoke to health professionals, did that focus conversations so we could understand what it's like to walk in their shoes professionally, trying to provide the very best care for people in suicidal crisis in the current system. We had, of course, those feedback loops. We then had a health professional co-design session where we brought health professionals together to reflect on some of the outputs so far of the co-design process, including what lived experience people had told us. Had that second session, second feedback loop, and then we had a combined session most recently where we brought people with lived experience together with health professionals to really start to work through some of the potential issues that might arise when a safe space is implemented in the region. We're now here at Feedback Loop 3, and we're going to present to you today, just fairly quickly go through what came out of that final session, as well as the survey, the results of the survey from the previous feedback loop. Thanks, Tina. So in terms of findings from that survey, that last survey, we had 4 survey respondents that identified as having lived experience, and then 2 that came from the health professional perspective. So just for people to keep that in mind when you look at the feedback that we're providing here. So lived experience perspectives were that participants either agreed or strongly agreed with the findings so far, and that they were reflective of the process. Respondents all believe that the most appropriate location for the safe space is close to but separate from hospital grounds. Several respondents mentioned the support and education of carers. That's come out quite strongly as a theme in this local co-design process, being an important aspect of the service. that one respondent was concerned that the staffing capacity was not enough for a local community, particularly given the higher than national average rates of suicide in your region. And that was also something that came through strongly. People were concerned about the limited resources in terms of what's required. And then several respondents raised the importance of staff safety. So what's come out very clearly in this particular local co-design process is concerns around safety. There was a lot of discussion around the idea that there would be required security, either LHD security, or if the safe space was off hospital grounds, then it would require a private security firm. So a lot of that was discussed throughout the process, but it did emerge again through the combined session, which you'll see. Here are a couple of quotes that sort of animate some of this content. So the importance of privacy in a small town is paramount, and I believe this creates hesitation and reluctance in seeking treatment. We definitely need a safe space for all ages in Griffith. People are reluctant to go to the hospital due to privacy and fear they will automatically be transferred to Wagga. And then ED needs to have a direct line where if there needs to be a referral, it can happen quickly. So that actually emerges a bit through working through the scenarios, which you'll see soon. Thanks, Tina. In terms of further perspective from the lived experience respondents of the survey, clinicians need to foster respect for peer workers who live with lived experience, who often can relate very easily with people seeking help. The SP peer workforce needs to be a part of the team for this to work well. And then someone's here speaking to the issue of safety. I agree that safety of staff is a key risk in establishing the service. This needs a lot of discussion and planning between all staff to implement a workable strategy. I think this is something that can be sorted with good communication between all parties. So that's someone that's really started to think through not just the issue of staff, but the way in which locally that can be worked through and a solution be found. And then also here in relation to security, it definitely needs to be a casual drop-in service, and the security issues can be addressed by all the usual electronic sources we're all aware of. We can have a full-time security guard on staff that does not necessarily need to be dressed in scary security clothes, but perhaps the service can have a shirt that everyone wears so that there is no distinction between people. So that was another suggestion, another suggested solution. And as you'll see in the scenarios, that one of those scenarios specifically addresses this issue of risk and security. And then someone just saying here, Griffith is unique in that we have a very generous community. If we can establish a good plan, I know we can access any shortfall in funding that may not be provided by the government. This is a necessary service and we must not be held back in our ideas because of a lack of funds. The sooner this service is up and running, the sooner we can start saving lives. So obviously a very powerful comment from one of the lived experience respondents in the local area. Then in terms of health professionals, there were some queries and concerns that were raised, and that was, some was to do with resourcing, so opening and availability on public holidays. We have already heard that people do think ideally it's a 24/7 proposition, a genuinely safe space for people, but also people realising that there needs to be, there's realistic kind of organisational and funding constraints. There's still all that information is fed back about what you ideally are looking for. Impact on staff illness and leave availability, again, that speaks to the limited, there's 2 FTEs, and adherence to broader LHD guidelines. So that speaks to the issue of governance, which is an ongoing conversation with the LHD. It's not something that's going to be neatly resolved through this co-design process. And then things like response to an incident within the space. That also speaks to that idea of protocol and governance. Issue around guests under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So we actually purposefully designed a scenario to work through that and to allow some of the solutions to be workshopped or potential ones. Involvement of clinicians. So again, you'll see that the scenarios do speak to that, and the purpose of those was to start to get some explicit conversation around when that might be needed, and then how the safe space as a non-clinical service would manage that. We've got a couple of comments that I think are worth pointing out here. It should not become the place where all mental health consumers get redirected to. So there was a concern there that it's an alternative, not just a redirection to reduce demand on ED, even though that may be a consequence. And then someone says here, I really like the innovative idea of a drive-through cafe in the day and safe space at night. Griffith does not have a drive-through coffee, and this would provide a source of advertising and remove the stigma, as it would become a normal place to visit. And then just a comment around the limited resourcing. So how will two staff provide both an immediate response and check-in when someone presents, as well as provide a buddy system and a conversational assessment all at once? So just an appreciation there. Obviously, particularly health professionals who are on the ground understand what some of the implementation barriers are and the limitations, just expressing that here, which is obviously super important to hear, and will be fed back to the LHD in the report. Thanks, Tina. And just a couple more here, just a comment around the ministry has provided funding for a clinician, so what would their role be if not clinical support? So that speaks to the idea of what the role of the manager in a non-clinical service. And we did have conversations that were facilitated during this process. It was health professionals told us very clearly that it was a very important thing to be worked through. So the role of the manager is something that the LHD will now have feedback on in terms of what kind of skills and experience and what kinds of services they provide. And then also someone has said it's discriminatory to make some groups more of a priority than others. Everyone at the safe space should be treated equally regardless of their background. So that's just a comment, because there was much discussion around priority populations, which we know have been identified at a much higher risk of suicide, and how we make, how you will make that the safe space inclusive, as well as attending to those things. And then again, governance would not be determined by the lived experience co-design, as it is a New South Wales service provision, not an NGO or a charity. So again, that just speaks to some of the concerns that health professionals have raised in the idea that governance is not something that can be influenced by co-design participants, and it's something that requires oversight, and really just sits with the LHD. So that's also been fed back through the process. Thank you, Tina. In terms of the joint co-design session, Tina is now going to take you through sort of the meaty part of the discussion that was the focus of that session. Thanks, Tina.
Thanks. So during this session, one of the key parts of this session was we looked at a number of scenarios. These scenarios were deliberately designed to promote the sorts of conversations that still needed to be had in the LHD, and allow for some discussion of, I guess, some issues where different people involved in the co-design process may have had different perspectives. And the scenarios were specifically adapted to raise some of the issues that had come up in previous sessions. So there were 3 scenarios, and what I'm going to do is present you the scenario, and then I'm going to share with you what came out of the conversation that we had with people with lived experience and health professionals in the Griffith area after they looked at this scenario. So scenario 1 is about Chantel. Chantel is a 17-year-old teenage girl who arrives at the safe space experiencing suicidal thoughts. It's the first time she's ever reached out for help, and she's frightened by what she's experiencing. She doesn't know where else to go, and it's 8 p.m, just 30 minutes before closing time. So the conversation that we had in the combined session around Chantel's scenario brought out a number of comments. A lot of those comments focused on the need for engagement and listening with guests at the safe space. So it was commented that it might be necessary for somebody to work back past 8 p.m. in order to be able to have a genuine conversation with someone like Chantel. And that for that reason, that overtime needs to be factored into the overall staffing model that is used for the safe space. Comments were made that they need to ensure that the service is staffed adequately, even if that means a reduction in the number of hours that the space is open for. It was also commented that workers need to spend time understanding the needs of guests, and that this is going to be really challenging if someone tries to do that in the space of half an hour. So it was suggested that the SPP workers engage Chantel regarding her natural supports and how they might be able to provide her with some support at this time and at the time when the safe space closes. They said that it's not necessary to contact an adult for 17-year-olds, but that this brings with it its own problems. So there was recognition that when a guest at the safe space is under the age of 18, that it is going to bring some complex issues. One of the things that was said during the conversation was that it doesn't matter what the time is. So it doesn't matter that it's 8 p.m. Guests need to know that they're not alone and something needs to be found for them. So in terms of pathways to other supports for someone like Chantel, it was suggested that SPP workers be involved in a warm handover to other supports. It was discussed that accessing the emergency department might be an option, and comments were made that this is the reason why we need to make sure that there are really strong relationships between the safe space and the emergency department. In terms of the service model and the staffing, a lot of conversation was held around the need for a flexible service delivery model and the need for overtime to be part of that model, or for time in lieu to be something that people can access so that staff are able to stay back past that closing time if that's what's needed when someone like Chantel visits a safe space. And overall, that really strong message came out. The safe space could not close at 8 p.m. in a situation like this, and that there need to be flexible opening hours. There was some conversation around innovation that might sort of help in situations where guests approach the safe space close to closing time, such as having something like a peer support line or a warm line that people can call when the safe space is closed. So this is the second scenario that we looked at in the combined co-design session. And it's about Leanne. Leanne walks into the safe space and she knows the safe space well, having visited it for a few weeks in a row. She had previously told an SP peer worker that it is a place where she can relax for a while, knowing that she is safe from self-harming while she is there. Tonight, she appears to be intoxicated and she's quite agitated that the peer worker she now feels she can trust isn't available to talk with her. She's becoming quite loud and insistent, and another guest has indicated that it is making them uncomfortable. So this is a scenario that in particular brought up some of those concerns that have come out of the co-design process in the Griffith area about the need for security in the safe space. So in terms of responding to scenario 2, people with lived experience and health professionals, range of comments. So the first one was that the safe space, the space inside doesn't have to be completely separate. So there don't need to be, I guess, separate rooms necessarily, but there was a comment made that it would be beneficial if SPP workers were able to take guests somewhere private to chat. So comments around, maybe there needs to be an outside space, or there needs to be a quiet corner that's got some privacy, where when you do have a situation like this, especially when one of the guests is potentially upsetting another guest due to intoxication or agitation, that having that separate area would be really valuable. Also, the comment was made that peer workers need to pick up on signs that other guests aren't feeling safe, because they do need to do the best they can to meet the needs of all guests. It was suggested that security cards could be present in the safe space, but dressed in plain clothes, maybe sitting around reading a book was one of the comments that was made, so that they weren't really obviously identifiable as being security, and it would keep that relaxed and private environment in the safe space. It was stressed that there must be an upholding of the no wrong door approach, and the people involved in the conversation definitely felt that someone like Leanne shouldn't be excluded from the space and turned away from the space on the basis of her intoxication. They said there was an observation that every behaviour has a function, and that includes becoming agitated, for instance, intoxication. And the SPP workers need to be mindful of the fact that these, what I guess a lot of people would call ways of coping, that they do serve a purpose for people when, and the SPP workers need to be aware of that when they're connecting with people. It was stressed that guests need to be given options. So there need to be choices available as to what the guests are able to do, what services they're able to be connected with, and what supports they're able to access while they're in the safe space. There was a lot of conversation around that idea of exclusion criteria. And the outcome of that conversation was that really it needs to be a case-by-case basis, rather than making assumptions like a blanket rule that people who are intoxicated are in danger of becoming violent, for instance. And so the SPP workers need to be able to judge any risks on the basis of what they're actually able to observe in that particular situation. It was also acknowledged, though, that if people are showing violent behaviours, then the SPP workers will need to make a judgment around that when it's required. So this is the last scenario that we had a look at and had a conversation around with people who have lived experience and health professionals in the Griffith area. And this one's about Amanda. Amanda is a 20-year-old woman with a history of past suicide attempts who comes to the safe space extremely distressed. She says that her life is not worth living, that she's tried everything to stop feeling this way. She tells the SPP worker that she's been on dozens of different medications, tried therapy for childhood trauma, done everything her psychologist told her. Nothing ever works, and she has run out of options. When the worker asks her if she has plans to kill herself, she tells them that she has bought medication off the internet and is just waiting for her mum and dad to leave her alone so she can take it. Her history of previous attempts is known to one of the safe space peer workers who had previously supported her in ED. So quite a lot of decisions were discussed and issues were discussed relating to Amanda's situation. It was commented that potentially in a situation like this, an SPP worker could utilise support via video conference and telephone and actually access advice from somewhere else. There was also discussion around whether Amanda be able to access support that way as well. Numerous people mentioned that the safety of someone like Amanda needs to be ensured and that there is a need to provide a safe intervention. It was commented that Amanda has shared a plan or intention to self-harm or attempt suicide, and that means that action needs to be taken. There was also a lot of conversation, though, around the fact that what happens with Amanda, it can't be rushed, and the conversation with Amanda around what she's experiencing can't be rushed. So the SPP workers need to take the time that is needed to understand her situation. Each person needs to be provided an empathetic service response. And so it was really stressed that Amanda needs to feel like she's received that empathy rather than there being an immediate intervention without that caring approach. There was also a comment around the fact that guests need to be provided with choices. So it's important for someone like Amanda that she doesn't have choices taken away from her and that she feels like she still has options. they suggested that we explore the potential of the SPP workers to accompany guests to the emergency department, so to actually go with them when they go to the emergency department. And that options for advice need to be available for SPP workers. So one of the suggestions that was discussed in the combined session was the possibility of SPP workers having a direct line of contact to a clinical nurse consultant, especially for them to access advice in situations like this. There was acknowledgement that it may be necessary to use the Mental Health Act to admit people involuntarily to hospital who have approached the safe space, but that all other avenues should be explored before using an involuntary admission. And there was concern that the safe space shouldn't fall back into the default approach of just admitting people through ED every time a person is presenting in crisis. It was observed that if there is an SPP worker who has supported this person previously, that it would be better that someone like Amanda be supported by someone she's comfortable with, and that effort should be made to contact that person. And because of that potential for SPP workers to be asked to work at times that they may not have been expecting to work, or in ways that might involve overtime, that there needs to be an ability for SPP workers to work that overtime so that people can get the support that they need. Essentially, each person needs empathy, and that was the key theme that came out of this conversation. They need empathy, they need to be provided options, and they need to not be forced. And they need the opportunity to de-escalate. And that was really stressed within this conversation, that if Amanda has the chance to talk to an SPP worker, she may calm and may de-escalate, and she needs to be provided the opportunity to do that and the time to do that, which means that the response to someone like Amanda can't be rushed. So after we had these conversations around what were really quite challenging scenarios to grapple with, we invited the people who are participating in the co-design process to share with us what their non-negotiables are for the safe space. And we're able to create a list that captured that range of lived experience and health professional non-negotiables. And what's really interesting about these is that they definitely reflect the issues that came out in our conversations from the very beginning all the way up to this co-design session. So firstly, first non-negotiable, that empathy is the priority and understanding a person's needs is key. That the model needs to be a model that evolves over time. That SPP workers need to be empathetic and empowering, as well as including carers in the process. That we need to ensure that peer workers are adequately supported, and confidentiality needs to be prioritised, particularly in a small town. We need to ensure that the model that is set up is sustainable. And that was actually, that was the biggest message that was repeated at the end of the co-design process. Everyone was really, really clear that it's wonderful that this safe space is being set up, but SPP workers need to receive the support that they need, and things need to be resourced in a way that means this service will be ongoing and that it is sustainable. Also, that empathy and understanding is essential, that people who work in the safe space need to be people who want to genuinely support the guests who come in, that the workspace needs to be energised and collaborative, and peer workers need to be given the opportunity to debrief and be supported. That there needs to be the ability to provide support to each individual, and that everyone needs to feel that they are important, no matter how big or small their situation is. So I'm going to pass back to Carrie now, just to let you know where things will go from here. Carrie, you're on mute.
Thanks, Tina. We will actually have time for we are live. A lot of people will be seeing this recorded. If there are any sort of questions, any burning questions that any people that have joined us now would like answered, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A function or the chat function. If there isn't, then just wait for a couple of moments, or I can talk people through next steps, but you're welcome to do that. And in terms of next steps in this region, there's the online survey. So like the other feedback loops, we then open it up after this webinar. The SurveyMonkey link is there, it'll be below. And it's also available on the Rose's website. It's available straight after this webinar and then closing on the 14th. It's a little bit different, this one, because it's not about feeding it back as to enrich the co-design process. In fact, all of the information that will be gathered over the coming week will then be collated and then integrated into the previously captured co-design outputs, specifically in order to for the service specification document, which Beacon produces. It'll all be integrated into that, the development of the draft service model. Then there will be also, after that report's handed over, we know that co-design is an iterative process, and so there is a guardianship role that Roses in the Ocean play to support the transfer of the service model to the actual service delivery, as well as this redesign workshop in 3 to 6 months after opening, that should not only include the original co-design participants, but also importantly, the guests who have utilised the service, to get them to actively participate in the ongoing continuous improvement of the service that these services are committed to. And so I guess what we would say now, there's a question there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Carrie, we've got a question. It says, I realise this may be premature as there's still a lot to do, but when might we see this process start to eventuate into a real thing? So I'm going to put that over to you, Carrie.
Great question. So we can't speak on behalf of the LHD. That is up to them. I think what's important is that people get ongoing communication about that. And so when the report is handed over, we do take an opportunity to follow up with the co-design participants. So as we hear more information, we certainly feed that back to the co-design participants who have really just in this region taken this process really seriously, really committed to it. I hope you can see with those scenarios that people really, and equally health professionals and people with lived experience, the way they worked hard through those scenarios to work out how this local safe space can maintain fidelity to the requirements of the ministry, to the values and principles that were identified by people with lived experience locally, but also meet the needs that were, and even the concerns that have emerged through this co-design. So I'd really encourage you that the way to continue to have some say is to spread the word about this final survey. We want to hear from as many people as possible in a diverse range. We can't get everyone in the room. We've had fabulous people come and really contribute very meaningfully to the process, but now those missing voices need to be heard. If you feel that there are people that need to have a say, let them know. And I think there's another question. Let me see. Is that right? Or that's been answered. How long have other safe spaces been running? It's a great question. So in terms of the Ministry of Health Alternatives to ED Services, so this particular initiative around safe spaces, the Illawarra Shoalhaven was the first co-design process. That is about to be, it literally is in the next couple of months, people expect that to be implemented and up and running, I guess, in the new year. Other ones are happening in parallel. I can't speak to where they're up to, but I'd also encourage you to have a look at the fact that there's many types and models of safe spaces beyond this, this project in particular. There's all throughout the country now, really, safe spaces are springing up all over the place. And if you're someone that's interested in this model, this approach, then I'd really encourage you to have a look and find out for yourself the sort of models that you think are going to work. There's certainly one in the, I guess the one that's been around and is most well known is the Safe Haven Cafe in at St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne. So that's something that you might want to have a look at. Lots of different models fit for different purposes, and the whole idea of safe spaces is to get safe spaces that are going to meet the needs and wants of particular communities and cohorts. So if there's just any other questions, let me have a look.
Yeah, we've just had a request whether we can add this link for the survey to the Facebook page for Roses in the Ocean, just because that would make it easier to share the link with other people. So definitely we'll take that back to the people who run the Facebook page for Roses in the Ocean and to Bridget, and we'll see if we can, if it's possible to do that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Tina. So if there's no other sort of burning questions that people have, we just want to say really thank you, like a heartfelt thank you to everyone in this region that have participated. Health professionals and people with lived experience, as we said, really did meaningfully contribute, actively contribute to this process. It was a really, it shows the commitment and the passion that people have locally for this type of model, but also for it to make sure that it's going to work and it's going to integrate within the existing system. So thank you. It's been invaluable hearing from you, and we want to say good luck with the implementation of it. It's a fantastic initiative and great to know that another LHD is going to have a service up and running hopefully soon in your region. So thank you.